Hi, I'm Mark Honeybone from Property Ventures, and welcome to our weekly podcast where we interview prominent members of the investment community along with other professionals in the New Zealand property market. This is a free service from Property Ventures so that you can keep current and learn from some of the best around New Zealand. To check us out, take a look at propertyventures.co.nz. We hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hi, and welcome back to another podcast. Now, we've had a few requests from around the country of people asking, how do we do a subdivision and, the rules, regulations, things to consider. So what we've got today is a sort of first part of a two-part. Today's more of a generic New Zealand-wide, this is how you do a subdivision. And we've got Bayard McKenzie from the Development Collective, a company that they specialise in coordinating and delivering multi-unit residential and mixed-use developments from the inception right through to completion. So he not only deals in Auckland, he also deals in Christchurch and Nelson and other parts of the country. So he will be a perfect person to ask a few questions about this. And alongside us, we have our sometimes co-host Aaron Davis, who's also been involved in a very big subdivision in the top of the South Island. So we hope you enjoy the podcast. So welcome to the show, Bayard.
Thanks.
And welcome back, Aaron.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be back.
Just before we start, what's been happening in Aaron's world? A few we hear auctions are going quiet. What's happening? Are you seeing that?
Look, good property's still selling. Marginal stuff isn't. Agents who get too involved in price or have opinions aren't. But look, the market's still really good. So, yeah.
I see the home buyers market right now, and good development sites are still very, very active.
Absolutely. It'll always stay the same. Death, divorce, and taxes mean people sell.
Excellent. Good work. Rightio. Hey, so we're here today, as per the intro, to talk to Bayard a bit about subdivisions around the country and how to do it. So just before we start, so listeners know who they're talking to today, or hearing today, do you want to tell us a bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, no problems, Mark. So a little bit about our company. So we formed around 6 months ago, so not actually that long ago, but I've been in the industry, the planning industry and development industry for kind of 15 years now. And through that time, I've had quite a bit of time in the consultant world and worked on probably some of Auckland's largest subdivision developments. So got a pretty broad range of experience. Our company tends to be heavily focused on medium-high density kind of inner city developments. Mm-hmm. However, we've, on our books at the moment, we've got rural subdivisions, some pretty large urban subdivisions, and a major subdivision down in Pairua of all places.
Right.
You wouldn't think there's demand there, but there you go. So, yeah, we're really busy at the moment. Obviously, Auckland's going really well, and that in turn is having a flow-on effect to the rest of New Zealand. So, yeah, we're pushing forward, really.
So you under obviously more than other people around Auckland, you understand the rest of some of the other councils and places around the country more so. And how did you get involved with that from in other parts of the country?
Yeah, so in past jobs, I guess, that I've had a lot of projects down in Christchurch Way. My wife's originally from Nelson, so I've had a little bit of dealings with some Nelson work as well.
Good quality people from top of the south.
Lovely people, and a lovely place as well. And prior to that, I spent 3 years in a consultancy in Queenstown, so the Central Lakes area. So I have a pretty broad understanding of the Central Lakes district as well.
Great.
And have also done a fair amount of development work up north, so beyond Mangawai, right up top of North Island.
So basically, Bay, you got a license to print money.
Oh, pretty much, yeah. Yeah. Any road you can name, I've probably travelled it.
Oh, great, love it. Okay, so there's a few people out there, and in fact, interesting enough, one of the first people to inquire about doing one of these was actually a chap who drives from Nelson to Blenheim every day, and wanted to know about it. No, I won't say any names.
Don't tell me to name that.
So there's a lot of people here listening. They don't know where to start. They've never done it before, and it's a wee bit harder than it quite often turns out to be. You soon learn. So just broadly, what do newbies get caught out with, and what are some of the hidden costs that they don't even think about?
Yeah, it's a good question. There is often cases where people do get caught out with certain parts of subdivision developments in particular. And I guess some of the big red flags for subdivision developments is land conditions. So, you deal with all sorts of geotechnical constraints for various sites across New Zealand. Not every site's the same. So where the costs tend to come in on subdivision developments is certainly those geotechnical conditions. If you don't identify those early on in the process, you can be up against some pretty heavy earthworking and construction costs for retaining walls. The other one to be aware of would be infrastructure. That is always a red flag as well. Make sure you do your homework on infrastructure. And what I mean by that is how the site can be serviced. That doesn't only include underground networks, it includes your roads, vehicle crossings, etc., etc. Those are costs in a subdivision development that can really balloon if you do not do due diligence up front. Consultant fees for subdivision developments are much in the muchness, depending on where you go. We would consider ourselves to be one of the cheaper ones, but
that's a
personal opinion. But yeah, I mean, and council fees obviously are pretty much in the muchness as well. But yeah, the big ones are really around those construction costs.
Mm. Since the earthquake in Christchurch, is that, you talked about the land conditions, is that bigger and better and harder than it used, and more expensive than it used to be?
Yeah, certainly. We're involved in a project in Christchurch and Sorenson's Place, and that was required significant remediation works. I think in the end we were looking at around, it would have been 3 million cubic metres of earthworks needed to come out of that site. And when you quantify that and you look at around $100 to $150 for a 6 cubic metre truckload, it does start to add up. And then not only that, you're looking at stabilisation works for the site as well as foundation works for the buildings. So council's a lot more cautious in Christchurch now with regards to ground conditions. So you really do need to get a geotechnical engineer and structural engineer on board very early to identify those risks. There's simply some areas that are no-go zones. There's red zoned areas where you cannot even develop. So yep, you do need to do your homework on that.
So, Bayer, how does someone, because plenty of us have had an education with trying to do that stuff, right? And you buy things, you approach council, you apply for a consent, it all turns to custody, right? So that in those situations for first-time developers, they approach you guys from the get-go?
Yeah, so the way that we like to work as a company is we set out a 3-stage approach usually for developments, and I'll just go through those really briefly for you. Stage 1 usually of our services is the feasibility stage of a project. So what we're trying to do for you as clients is de-risk it for you, completely minimise the risk and answer all of those questions that could cause heavy delays and costs further down the process. That's actually a reasonably cost-effective process. As part of that process, we look to get in quantity surveyors. We'll get engineers and geotechnical engineers, structural engineers and civil engineers, and we'll obviously get any other party that we need to get involved, traffic engineers, to really answer those questions before you press go on the major costs.
So right now when you say that, in my head I'm going ding, 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 ding.
Why isn't there just one engineer?
So all of those things, let's hypothetically say there's a site that you can be broken into 4, right? This is a mum and dad investor who's trying to do it for the first time.
Yep.
What's roughly a ballpark cost in, say, in Auckland to do something like that, to get a feasibility done?
So to give you an idea, in Auckland, if you're looking at a 4-lot subdivision, there's obviously a number of those professions which I've labelled, which we can cross out because you simply don't need them. So you're probably looking at a ballpark of between $3,500 to $5,000,
okay,
and that'll give you a reason.
Pardon, someone wanted to book an auction.
Maybe that's a client already.
Yeah.
So that'll give you a reasonably strong answer.
Good.
But you can generally, with a subdivision of that size, rely on a civil engineer and a planner and a surveyor, and they will give you your answers you need.
Yep.
The planner certainly gives you the answers in terms of whether there's any further need for specialists. When we start looking at geotech engineers, it's the Christchurch issues, it's the steep land, it's the rural land that no one knows about, that no one has a record on. Those are the things.
Because I assume that anyone listening that has experience with sites that are 50 to 60 plus, they kind of know this. But with for people that are trying to do it for the first time, about $3 to $5 grand to do a feasibility. Go right here are the logistics. This is kind of what you can expect.
Yeah,
potential issues and stuff, I guess.
Exactly, and we tailor it to the client's needs. So
Yep.
we will push and pull depending on what the client's budget is and how much they're willing to spend. We can give them a minimum answer, or we can certainly do a lot more due diligence. Our preference under that stage 1 is to try and get as many answers as possible for them, because as I said, stage 2 is where the prices ramp up a little bit.
Okay.
A little bit, that's good. I'm interested in hearing that bit, Aaron.
Oh, yeah.
So just at that stage, I mean, so at that point, usually the purchaser can go, hey, we can probably go ahead here. There's still going to be potential issues. How often do you find potential issues after that where that may be a deal stopper? Obviously, you don't know what you don't know, but I suppose you're pretty confident at that stage you can do what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty with subdivisions is there are not a huge amount of hidden risks. And those hidden risks you can sort out reasonably early on in the process. So geotechnical issues are geotechnical issues. The engineer will go on site, do some soil testing, and determine land stability straight away for a minimal cost. Engineering is engineering; it's black and white. It's just how much does a pipe cost, and how much upgrade do we have to do, for example. The planning risks for subdivisions, as long as you keep within those minimum lot sizes, are very minimal. So there's not a hell of a lot of hidden costs that jump out later on in the process. Where you've got to be careful is dealing with council. So, and you know that with any project, that council can be the showstopper. So you've got to get them involved early on as well. So you've got to go to those pre-application meetings, have discussions with council. If your council doesn't offer pre-application meetings, then go talk to the front of house. Just find out from them a little bit of information about the area and about the likelihood of gaining consent. And they'll give you a reasonably firm answer at those meetings. They never hang their hat on it, of course, because they're it's officer advice only, and it's not legally binding. However, you push them pretty hard on just ensuring that you've got at least some answer to go on. It does.
Sorry, babe. Do you find when you have those meetings with council, where there's a grey line, there's a black and there's a white, and then sometimes in the middle there's that little grey that if you are persistent and consistent with arguing a point, you can kind of make the difference between something getting through and something not? Yeah,
I mean that's pretty much bang on the money. And the beauty with, not trying to sell our company, but the beauty with having a planning consultant on board or a surveyor engineer on board, I would say a planning consultant is more valuable in those scenarios, is that they can read the council pretty early on, and the experience gained through various pre-application meetings that they may have been to, they can understand from the first few words whether council are going to be on board with this, and they can report back on that and advise you accordingly. So they are valuable. For the smaller subdivisions, there is an ability to go it alone, but again, it's a complicated process, so it does pay to have professionals on board.
So I was going to say, I suppose the first time developer out there who's listening, I go, I can do it myself and go and do it, but I guess every time there's a hold up, you've got to wait another 4 or 6 weeks, I suppose, and that's the big time thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And time's money, and that's why you pay the big bickies, I guess, for people like yourself to, as I said, read a council. They know what's going to, they can read the situation, and they can present the case to the council knowing what they're going to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's the small bickies, but yeah.
Well, you've got to start somewhere. My next question was, I see a lot of people doing stuff, that's non-notified, so anyone, it's kind of it's a done deal pretty much, right? It falls within whatever the boundaries are that council set. Do you see many people that pick up the stuff that has to be notified, but that's where the money's to be made, because you're not sure if it can or can't be broken up, and the people that can live on the fringes, that's where the money's to be made, because you're not having to compete in the open market with something that definitely can be broken into three, but you can hire people like yourselves to kind of massage it through, then all of a sudden you've had a big win if you can get through.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest frustration as a planning consultant over the course of the 15 years is that people are afraid of notification, and the fear tends to derive from the cost of council fees. So, to give you an example, in Auckland, to go through a notified process, it's going to cost you $25,000 in council fees alone, and that's on top of that's a deposit. So that will then jump to even further. And for it, that may seem like a small chunk, but when you're looking at just a single house, for example, it's a lot of money. So, but the issue I guess I have as a planning consultant, and I've always had it, is that don't fear notification. Notifications are simply just a chance for the public to have a say, and the public's got to have a valid reason to object. There is a RMA that they have to abide by. They have to identify effects, and those effects have to be valid. So when you have a planning consultant who's strong in that department driving your project forward, it's very hard for the public to win. The commissioners tend to side with the planning consultants who have done their due diligence, and the other way you want to approach it is you want to, when you're going through a notification process, have council on board.
Yeah.
So if you've got council on board and yourselves on board, and you're only dealing with Joe Bloggs down the road who has an issue with people biking past his property, it's going to be very hard, which is an actual example of a project I'm dealing with. It's going to be very hard for him to win.
So in some ways, if people are looking to realise value out of land, they're notified if you're prepared to take a punt. Because I see it all the time with auctions when people go, oh, look, it's 848 square metres easy. But if it's 798, they say, oh, it's notified. So no one assumes that it can be done. And that's where because obviously if you can get this thing through, that's another $500,000 in your kicker. But you're gambling $25,000 to get it through.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate.
It's a good bet.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing of the way the New Zealand planning system is set up is it's a rule-based system. So what that has resulted is a lot of planners have tended to just look at rules and think if there's a rule broken, it's an effect. That's not the case. If a rule's broken, maybe that will result in notification, but there is significant advantages in pushing forward with notification and seeing common sense with some of these developments.
Yeah, okay.
Simply because a rule's broken doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It could result in a better outcome. But your planning consultant should advise you on that and should really steer you in the right direction, because there is a cost and there is a risk. And I guess the final thing to point out on that would be that there is an appeal process as well. So the New Zealand planning system, again, is heavily favoured towards the neighbour because they do have third-party right of appeals. In the UK planning system, for example, they don't exist, but here they do. So what that means is even if the commissioners err on the side of the applicant, the neighbour can then appeal it to the Environment Court and then appeal it further to the High Court. So while you may end up getting through those three processes, it does cause significant delays to an application.
And stress. Let's not forget about the stress.
Significant
not
cost.
Talking about experience, are you there, Aaron?
Just a little bit.
So
not me.
It's something to
in fact,
be
I'll just
mindful.
ask one question. I mean, you go to the Environment and High Court. I mean, you say that's a time thing. I mean, I know you've been involved with one, Aaron. I won't get too much into that. But how many? It took a matter of years, did it, to delay?
3 or 4 years. We had to start up our own bank, pretty much. But yeah, and it made a significant amount of stress on the people that were involved. I wasn't involved in doing it directly, but yeah, they put 10 years on their life.
Yeah.
I wouldn't wish it on anyone. You got to hire Queen's Counsel to argue your case, and it's pretty brutal.
Right.
Yeah, it's a scary process for sure. Particularly scary being a planner too.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, yeah, there is the risk there, and as Aaron said, it's potentially a 2 to 3 year delay.
Yeah.
That's simply because they're so busy.
Yeah.
But with a lot of people that are listening to this podcast that are trying to make money in a market that's very hot, in some ways what I'm hearing, some of that notified stuff, don't be afraid of it because the upside is substantial.
Significant.
Yeah.
Significant. And we always, as planning consultants, we are ethically binded to the New Zealand Planning Institute in terms of our advice. So we will always advise of the best outcome that we consider for the site. And as I said, that outcome may break several to 100 rules, but we would still consider it to be potentially the best outcome for the site from a planning perspective and in the least amount of effects. So, we advise accordingly on that, and notification may be the sensible path to take in some of these situations.
So even if you were looking at, I won't go into the details of zoning, but let's hypothetically say you had something that was, 800 square metres mean that it was non-notified, but 790 means that it was notified. You're better off going for those ones that are just shy, right? They'll be easier to get through. The one that's clearly, from 7 to 800.
Yeah, and this is the frustration again that I have with the planning system. That there is a very driven rule-based system. So an 800 square metre site becomes a non-issue, whereas a 790 square metre site becomes an issue, and there's no real common sense as to why that is, because we as planners have to look at the effects of that, and you could argue quite comfortably that a shortfall of 10 square metres isn't really going to create an effect. So it's about common sense. It's about ensuring that the development's going to achieve good outcomes, and obviously the best return for you as the client as well.
It's about not knowing. It's about knowing, I guess, what others don't know gets the deal that Aaron's sort of talking about. And I've just been involved with a project that you're working on, and it's not a heck of a lot over 700 square metres, and spoke to the so-called best agents around town. Even another planner said there's no way you can put three sites. And I heard you in a pre-app meeting talking to the council, and the council are all over it because you presented something that's not in the rules. But it's the way I read it's not in the rules, but it's you present them a case good for the environment, a good planning, and they're all over it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can actually get a really good deal then if you over someone that's not going to bid in an auction or whatever.
Yep, that's a very strong example of a good outcome that's maybe contrary to the rules, but it's going to create a very strong and good urban design outcome. And that was 3 architecturally designed homes on 700 square metres. It's common sense that can work, and it was close to a very major town centre, so it's common sense that a density of that level can work. It was very contrary to the plan, but council are more than supportive of it, and it would go through non-notified. So nice. It's about just limiting those risks. We limited the risks from very early on in the process, and got council on board pretty early. So.
Okay, so just moving on, we went through stage 1 before, 3.5 to 5K to go. Yeah, you can probably do it. What's sort of the next stage then for a newbie listener to subdivisions? What's the next stage, and how where's the money start coming from there, and what for?
Well, the next stage is obviously the logical resource consent application, and that. So once you've got an idea of what you want to do after stage 1, and everyone's pretty clear that there's no huge risks or red flags to be aware of going forward.
Yep, I've bought it. I've gone unconditional. I've paid my money.
We're ready to go.
I'm sweating.
We're ready to go. Then everyone jumps into the process. So that's when you start preparing your resource consent for subdivision, and that requires supporting reporting from anywhere from a landscape architect to civil engineers to do infrastructure, to geotechnical engineers, as I've touched on, sometimes traffic engineers for the biggest subdivisions, and contamination experts sometimes, ecologists. Everyone starts getting involved in that process when and if they need to. And then
So I need to be a consultant really moving forward, don't I?
You do.
It's a sure thing.
Make even more money than an auctioneer.
Sure than NSP with a cold beer on a Thursday night, mate. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, and that's when we would bundle up the resource consent application, assessment of environmental effects, and start to look to lodge the application with council. It can range from anywhere from for a smaller subdivision, you're probably looking, say 4 lots, you're probably looking at a 30-page report, all the way through to a 50-lot subdivision,
roughly,
100-page to 200-page report.
Yeah, roughly though, with a four subdivision, what's that resource consent? What's someone going to be up for that? So just say standard, right? There's no fish hooks.
Yeah, so standard resource consent. Let's say it's a flat site. There's no major issues. You definitely need a geotechnical engineer, and the reason I say that is part of the RMA, under the subdivision section of the RMA, it requires you to prove land stability as your subdivision consent. So you cannot do that as a planner, etc., etc. So you always need a geotechnical engineer for subdivision. So that they will cost anywhere between, for a development of that size, $2,000 to $5,000 for a report. You wouldn't need a traffic engineer for a small 4-lot subdivision because there's no traffic effects. You would need a civil engineer, and they will do a servicing plan to confirm wastewater, water, stormwater, and vehicle crossings, telecommunications as well as power. And so they produce a servicing plan and infrastructure report to support the subdivision, and they can cost anywhere between $7,000 to $15,000. Bear in mind that their plans get used in the future for engineering approvals and building consents, so they're quite an important part of the process. Planning fees for a small scale subdivision of that nature are anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000, and that would probably be about all you need. And surveyors, and then the surveyors will charge for a topographical survey, so they will survey the site and its existing conditions, and they will charge for drafting up a scheme plan. They also have further work later in stage 3.
You guys coordinate all those experts?
And that's correct. So as part of the planning fee, there is a project management component in that, and the planner should be coordinating the entire project.
Okay. So my maths tells me it's about 30 or 40 grand.
Give or take.
Yeah, give or take. Yep.
And then on top of that, you'll have council fees.
So just a question: if someone's just wants to subdivide and then sell the section off, or if they don't want to do that, if they want to build, do you need to have the building plans at that stage with a resource consent application? Or if you're going to build on it, do you have to have it at that stage, or you can actually do it without plans, and someone's just going to do a section of sell-off, so they don't really care what's going to be built on there? It's obviously a straightforward bit of dirt that they're doing. Do they have to have any plans, or is it just the site plan?
It's not an easy answer, that one, and the reason it's not is because every council is very different. In Auckland, for example, there are particular zones in which they require you to have the land use consent lodged with subdivision. And what I mean by land use consent is the consent for the dwellings or the houses to allow you to go for a smaller lot. If you're going for just a straight out vacant lot subdivision, then the answer is no, you don't need the plans for the houses. And in actual fact, once you get titles for those lots, there's a high chance that you might be able to design a house that doesn't even need a resource consent in some scenarios.
Okay.
So, it's varying answers, I guess, across New Zealand.
And those costs you just said before, leading up to resource consent, that's pretty well the same, give or take, around the country.
It is, yep. It'll be a little bit higher in Auckland, I suspect.
The beer's a bit more, isn't it?
Parking's a lot more expensive here.
Around the RMA, the government a couple of years ago said they were going to tidy it up and make it a whole lot easier. Has it become easier?
No.
No, right.
Yes and no. Sorry, I'll take that back. It's going to become easier for smaller infringement developments.
Okay.
So for a rear extension that might infringe a height to boundary, height in relation to boundary rule, as long as you have the neighbours sign off on that, you can actually get a dispensation from resource consent. Those are the amendments coming through into the RMA. They want to fast track the smaller ones.
Cool. So that's good for the small, for the first time investor trying to do some of that stuff, right?
Definitely. It won't help any people doing subdivisions, because subdivisions you always need consent. But it certainly will help people doing those minor extensions and stuff. And the government's trying to just release the backlog of minor consents in council, which is just causing headaches and unnecessary delays. So they are giving some flexibility to that.
Right. Okay, so next stage, you get the resource consent comes along, you get the good news from the council, and you got a whole
with all their conditions,
which is going to cost a couple more dollars. So what is it then? Obviously, you got to fulfil whatever they want. For a simple subdivision, we're talking about a 3 or 4 lot subdivision. What happens then? What's the investor got to do, or the developer have to do then?
So you pretty much answered the question just earlier on. The conditions will come out, and those conditions will set out a range of items you need to tick off before you can get your subdivision titles. And a lot of them are usually steered towards engineering. So they will ask you to put the services in to connect your lots up. They'll ask you to put vehicle crossings in if you need to. They may ask you to remove trees or do some earthworks. Just little things like that provide a stable building platform. Once you've fulfilled those conditions, the surveyor then comes in and will do what's called a survey plan, a formal survey plan, and that's a 223, it's called. And that gets lodged with Auckland Council, with the council that you're dealing with. And that is essentially what your subdivision is going to look like once it's complete on your LINZ title. Once that's approved, then the surveyor will also go out and identify all the services, etc., that have been put in place and lodge the 224C completion certificate with council. And that essentially means your subdivision is complete. You've fulfilled all of the conditions under the resource consent and your obligations under the resource consent. Once that's granted, it then gets the final survey plan that's been approved will then get lodged with Land Information New Zealand, and Land Information New Zealand will then issue titles. So that typical process for that, for a small scale subdivision, you're probably looking at around 6 to 8 months.
From way to go for, yeah. So how many times the council actually, do they really only just come back that, you said it's your own surveyor that does that, issues the 224C, is it? Rather than the council? The
surveyor will apply for the 224C,
okay,
which is a completion certificate, just to confirm to council's officers, subdivision officers and monitoring officers that the subdivision is now complete, all the conditions have been fulfilled, the pipes are in the place where they need to be, the vehicle crossings where it needs to be, the trees being removed, etc., etc. Yep.
Okay, so at that stage you're going to get Aaron to sell the place at auction, section at auction, and he'll get the couple of dollars for you, or you go through the next stage of building consent, which is would you get involved with that with clients also?
We can look after the process. So we are in the process of bringing on a development manager, project manager, who has vast experience in major subdivision developments. So we can look after that process for you. Yep. There are also other elements to obviously the subdivision process that will come into play for different size subdivisions, but I've just touched on really the most simple one. And the most simple one will exclude any engineering plan approvals, for example, and any needs for building consents.
Right. Great stuff. So if someone's sitting there, and there will be some people who have done a whole lot of subdivisions listening to this, and some have never done one before, apart from obviously the money, what are the more key factors of someone doing what we've been talking about, a 3 or 4 lot subdivision, to someone that's developing a whole 50 to 100 site sort of subdivision? What's the extra things that they might have to think about, or and with that, and obviously there's a time factor that's going to take a little bit longer, I guess. Yeah, I mean,
there's quite significant difference in both and in certain scales of development. So your standard 2 lot subdivision, you can reasonably be comfortable that it's going to take you anywhere between probably 8 to 10 months from the start, from press go all the way to titles, depending obviously on how quickly council can process things. A 50 lot subdivision is, for example, is a lot more complex in that it's got significant engineering works required. It's subjected to seasonal conditions, particularly around earthworking. It's got a major amount of engineering plan approval work to go in. So if you're proposing roads, for example, they need engineering plan approval. Public infrastructure needs engineering plan approval. So there is a lot more that goes into a 50 lot subdivision than a 2 lot subdivision. So to give you a time frame of a 50 lot subdivision, we worked on recently a 600 lot subdivision, and that has taken, they won't even be issuing titles yet, so that's taken over 2 years. So there is significant differences in time frames here.
That's to title stage, so that's after the resource consent, and then get to the next stage. Okay.
Yeah, the big challenges with those larger scale subdivisions, obviously it's seasonal, so there is a significant amount of earthworks required on major subdivisions, and that's all subjected to the seasons. So often the earthwork season starts in November, finishes in March, the drier parts of the year. So you are subjected to that. So if your resource consent has the unfortunate manner of popping out in February, then there's a potential delay. You're going to have to wait till November to start the earthworks. Right. So those things factor into it and do cause time delays. The key there is making sure your consultant, your planning consultant, is well aware of that, and that they are targeting the subdivision consent to drop out around September.
I suppose even though it fluctuates slightly around the country, it's still pretty well the months of the year for.
It's much in the muchness across the country. Yeah, it's November to March is when your earthworking contractors like to work, and they will be diggers stop around March. Yeah, sometimes in Auckland, for example, they can push into April on the better years.
Mm.
Yep. If you use that as your guideline, that you should
2 years for 600 lot subdivision. What are you doing, Aaron? No.
Never said I was the sharpest tool in the shed.
All good.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. What other points do you want to tell listeners that maybe to be aware of, or some important points?
Yeah, I think the main point really from our end is just do your homework. The biggest challenge we always find with clients that come to us halfway through a process is they just haven't done their homework, and that may require you passing that job on to someone else to do it, or you can do it yourself. But seek advice from a planning consultant. Most planning consultants, and our company in particular, will give you some free advice, pro bono advice right from day one, just to say, look, this is what we think you can do, and this is your risks, and if you're happy to go with us, we're happy to drive this process for you. And yeah, as I said, just minimise your risks. That's probably the biggest thing. Be aware, obviously, of timeframes as well, that not everything pops out after 2 days. We are, as planning consultants, very influenced by council timeframes. So while we endeavour to do the best we can, we are subjected to those delays at council that are out of our control.
But in summary, though, you're not, unless you're doing it full time, you'd be reasonably foolish to try and think you can go through and do it yourself, right? If you're working another job, like, you either own it or you don't, like any industry, right? You either know your stuff or you don't.
Yeah, exactly right, Aaron. It's a complex process. It's a very complex process. Building a house, not complex, not so complex. Complex to build it for sure, but not to get consent for it.
Yeah.
Subdivisions is a whole different beast because you are dealing with engineering elements and stuff. So if you don't have a handle on the process, and it's a very strong RMA process, you're better off getting someone that does have a handle on it to look after it.
Absolutely, and you go and talk to them, especially in the smaller towns. Someone sitting in Huntly or Blenheim or whatever. You go to your local surveyor, planner, or whatever. They know all the little issues that might be going on in that town right there and then, and what's coming up also.
Yep, and I think the biggest thing we find in our industry is a lot of people seem to be reluctant to pay to look at a fee of the range of consultants that need to be involved and stomach it. The issue we have there is, that is money well spent. Getting that advice on, and that person representing you on board will save you significant time down the track, and will de-risk the project for you. And at the end of the day, it is a drop in the water when you consider the value of the lot.
Property's a big ticket item, and too many people are not willing to spend as much as they should on some good advice.
Yeah, so for
generically,
de-risk
that's
is
what it's doing.
Imperative word, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, to give you an example, consultant fees all up for a subdivision project will be in the range of $10,000 to $20,000 per lot, and when you're selling a lot for $500,000, it's a drop in the water. So, but the value you get out of that is significant. You get all of those services thrown in. You get the coordination of the engineering works. You get the tender document reviews. You get everything. It's significant, and it's not to be underestimated.
Great stuff.
And don't be afraid of notified.
That's right.
Don't be afraid.
Where the money is.
That's my learning from today.
We as planning consultants thrive off notification.
Because I suppose everyone you get through, you can say to someone, hey, mate, we got stuff through that no one else can get through, right? You live and die by that, don't you?
Yeah, and it's just enjoyable. It's, you fight for good outcomes, and sometimes council just don't see the good outcomes, or the neighbour particularly doesn't see the good outcomes. So we enjoy that fight.
Great stuff. Well, thanks very much for your time today, Bayard. It's I'm sure everyone's learned a hell of a lot.
That's okay. No, it's been a pleasure to come along, and hopefully it's helped.
All good. And then Aaron, just closing up. Anything you see where the market is right now? $1 million question. You're not prepared for this, but I'm going to throw you in the deep end.
I was in Wellington.
You're out there. You see it every day.
I was in Wellington yesterday talking to a couple of hundred good Harcourts agents down there, and they're just noticing a massive lift in auctions. People attending auctions that Auckland was going through, 2-3 years ago. And in Auckland now, there's a lot of stock that's hit the market. Open home numbers are down, so there's a lot of people running around. They're not quite as hot as they were, but good property's still selling. So, as I say, real estate is just a sport in Auckland. Everyone's got an opinion, everyone's got a play, and good luck playing the game.
Absolutely. On that note, we'll leave you for 2 weeks, and we'll come back and carry on the next topic. So have a great week.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Make sure you join us on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Property Ventures NZ. And also, I really appreciate it if you could jump on iTunes and or Stitcher and give us a rating and review. That'll help other investors finding us and listening to these good podcasts. Have a great week.